November 12, 1942, in the unforgiving western desert of North Africa. An American vehicle, recently captured, lay deserted close to the remnants of a destroyed British supply convoy. Its operators had hastily retreated when their position became utterly untenable. Conventional Wehrmacht protocol dictated the vehicle's destruction or simply abandoning it. However, the reconnaissance unit's commanding officer had a different notion. "Bring me our most capable mechanic," he ordered. "I need an assessment of its usability." The next 30 minutes would bring a profound revelation to the Afrika Korps mechanics, one that fundamentally questioned their ingrained belief in German technical supremacy. The realization was not an abrupt shock but a slowly building awareness that solidified with every stage of the inspection. A small metal plate on the dashboard confirmed its identity, Willis MB. The Americans affectionately called it a Jeep. Lifting the hood revealed an engine bay of remarkable order, clearly engineered for swift servicing by personnel possessing minimal technical aptitude. Components were distinctly labeled, wiring was color-coded, and all critical parts were easily reached without the need for specialized instruments. In his 20 years of servicing German military transport, the senior mechanic had never encountered such thoughtful design prioritizing field maintenance. Every single bolt was standardized. Every component appeared identical across all examples of its type, clearly designed for simplified mass production and easy replacement. The Go Devil engine, displacing 134 cubic inches, delivered 60 horsepower at 4,000 revolutions per minute. While not particularly impressive by German engineering standards, the underlying philosophy was utterly groundbreaking. This motor was not conceived for technical flawless perfection, it was built to be fundamentally simple, overwhelmingly reliable, and above all, readily manufacturable. A mechanic with limited training could service this power plant using standard tool kits, requiring no specialized wrenches or intricate procedures usually demanding factory-trained specialists. The Americans, it seemed, had intentionally designed this machine assuming that maintenance under combat pressure would be performed by farmhands and factory laborers. By November 1942, the contrast between the American and German approaches to military vehicle design had become sharply defined. By the conflict's end, America would roll out in excess of 640,000 Jeeps, a figure dwarfing Germany's total wartime output of just over 50,000 Kubelwagens. This sheer gulf in production capacity represented a far deeper, more alarming truth. The Jeep was the ultimate manifestation of American industrial thinking, standardized, streamlined, and engineered for mass fabrication by a semi-skilled workforce utilizing completely interchangeable parts. As the mechanics proceeded with their detailed examination, the officers approached. "Well, can we utilize it?" The senior mechanic looked up, choosing his words with caution. "Sir, this vehicle is truly extraordinary. It has been designed by someone who fully appreciates the realities of conditions in the field." A nearby officer scowled. German engineering is universally acknowledged as the finest in the world. The mechanic wisely avoided direct debate. Instead, he gestured toward the vehicle's four-wheel drive mechanism. "Observe this transfer case. Activating the four-wheel drive requires nothing more than the pull of a single lever. In sharp contrast, our Kubelwagens demand several complex operations, and, critically, the majority of our vehicles lack four-wheel drive capability entirely. The Wehrmacht's primary light transport, the Volkswagen Type 82 Kubelwagen, was certainly an excellent machine in several respects. Ferdinand Porsche had engineered it with characteristic German meticulousness. It was lighter than the Jeep, consumed less fuel, and its air-cooled engine cleverly eliminated the vulnerability of a radiator to enemy fire. Yet, it carried one critical flaw: it was rear-wheel drive only. Across the shifting sands of North Africa, the mountainous terrain of Italy, and the deep mud of the Russian front, this restriction proved to be absolutely devastating. The Jeep, conversely, could instantly engage all four wheels whenever required. The system was so intuitive and straightforward that a soldier with virtually no education could master its function in minutes. The inspection continued. The suspension system employed basic leaf springs. While rudimentary next to the Kubelwagen's advanced torsion bars, they were significantly simpler to mend under operational conditions. The electrical system was basic but ruggedly robust. The fuel system was capable of operating on almost any available grade of gasoline without modification. Most concerning of all was the vehicle's weight. The Jeep weighed approximately 2,450 pounds, compared to the Kübelwagen's 1,540 pounds, a difference of 910 pounds. German engineers would have immediately flagged this excess bulk as a defect, reducing performance and increasing consumption. The mechanics, however, recognized the brilliant method in this seeming madness. That additional weight translated directly into sheer durability. The frame was substantially overbuilt, constructed to withstand punishment that would shatter lighter vehicles. The Americans had determined that robustness under duress was more vital than technical efficiency. They had manufactured a vehicle anticipating misuse, overloading, and exposure to conditions no engineer would typically sanction, yet engineered it to survive regardless. This was not the American technical incompetence promised in Wehrmacht training films. This was an engineering approach rooted firmly in the realities of combat, not theoretical perfection. The unit successfully recovered the Jeep and brought it back to their forward operating base. Over the next 3 days, the mechanics subjected it to exhaustive field trials. They drove it across the soft, deep sand where Kübelwagens frequently struggled and became bogged down. They deliberately loaded it far beyond its stated capacity. They inflicted abuse that would have immediately crippled most German vehicles. The Jeep absorbed every test without complaint. In soft ground, where rear-wheel drive transport necessitated careful, slow driving to avoid getting stuck, the Jeep simply powered through. Its low-range gearing allowed it to crawl over serious obstacles at a walking pace, a feat impossible for the Kübelwagen's gearing, despite its reduction hubs. News quickly disseminated through the Afrika Corps. The Americans possessed a vehicle that decisively outperformed the Wehrmacht equivalent in almost every meaningful metric. Officers and mechanics from other units flocked to examine the vehicle. Their reactions followed a clear trajectory: initial disbelief, followed by grudging professional respect, and culminating in profound dismay as the industrial implications became apparent. A supply officer, who had worked in the German automotive sector before the war, spent an afternoon meticulously studying the vehicle. His final judgment was stark. This machine represents a fundamental schism in our methodologies. Our vehicles are built to attain absolute engineering perfection. The Americans, conversely, build theirs to be manufactured. In the brutal mathematics of total war, that distinction holds a superior weight. He elaborated for the assembled officers and non-commissioned officers. Examine the engine block. It is cast, not machined to the ultra-fine tolerances that we demand. The Americans deliberately sacrifice a marginal degree of performance for monumental gains in the velocity of production. They can train a semi-skilled worker to assemble this engine in a fraction of the time required to build one of our motors. Now, project that advantage across every single component. He pointed specifically to the stamped metal body panels. These panels are aesthetically crude compared to our vehicles, yet they can be produced by the thousands in factories that, just months ago, were fabricating household appliances. The Americans have successfully mobilized their entire economic infrastructure. Every refrigerator plant, every washing machine factory, every commercial truck manufacturer, all have been instantly converted to military production. We possess no capacity to match this volume. The officers fell silent. He had articulated the terrifying suspicion that had been growing in many of their minds. Germany's pre-war focus on meticulous quality and precision made perfect sense during peacetime. But in total war, the American principle of delivering adequate products quickly and abundantly was proving devastatingly effective. One mechanic dedicated that evening to compiling a detailed technical intelligence report. He thoroughly documented every facet of the Jeep's design, noting both its manifest strengths and its comparative weaknesses. The report quickly ascended the chain of command, one of thousands of such documents continuously generated by German technical intelligence. Similar reports were inundating Wehrmacht headquarters from every active front. German mechanics and engineers were encountering American material and vehicles with increasing regularity, and the professional assessments were uniformly alarming. The Americans were simply outproducing Germany by ratios that seemed statistically impossible. In late 1942, Wehrmacht intelligence commissioned a dedicated study on Allied vehicle production numbers. The results simply confirmed their worst premonitions. American factories were manufacturing military transport at a staggering rate of thousands per day. Ford's massive Willow Run plant alone was finishing a B-24 Liberator heavy bomber every 63 minutes at its maximum production rate. American shipyards were launching Liberty cargo ships faster than German U-boats could possibly sink them. The compiled statistics revealed a chilling reality: America's total military vehicle production for 1942 surpassed the combined total output of Germany, Italy, and Japan. And that immense production volume was still accelerating. The captured Jeep swiftly became something of a celebrity within the unit. Soldiers actively competed for the opportunity to drive it. Officers began using it for forward reconnaissance, relying on its unquestionable durability far more than their own service vehicles. When parts eventually wore out, replacement components were scavenged from other captured Jeeps with alarming ease. Everything was completely interchangeable. By early 1943, the Afrika Korps had accumulated dozens of captured Jeeps. Wehrmacht mechanics established informal networks, sharing maintenance expertise and hoarded spare parts. A thriving black market quickly emerged for captured American vehicles and equipment. A fully functional Jeep could command prices vastly exceeding its theoretical value, purely because its superiority for desert warfare was universally acknowledged. Then came the inevitable conclusion, May 13, 1943, when the Afrika Korps finally capitulated in Tunisia. Approximately 250,000 German and Italian servicemen became prisoners of war. Their fighting was over, but their education in the true scale of American manufacturing capability was just beginning. The gulf between German and American capabilities became impossible to ignore during the long journey into captivity. American trucks transported prisoners in massive quantities, a logistical feat that would have demanded columns of horse-drawn wagons in the Wehrmacht. American Liberty ships, often constructed in just 5 to 6 weeks at the peak of 1943 production, compared to the initial 8 months, carried thousands of men across the Atlantic. Every stage of the logistical operation demonstrated an organizational capacity that dwarfed every achievement Germany had managed. At the massive prisoner processing center in Oran, Algeria, captured mechanics watched American motor pool sergeants casually service a fleet of transport with an efficiency that would have been unimaginable within the Wehrmacht. The motor pool contained scores of jeeps, trucks, and command cars. Young American soldiers, many scarcely out of their teens, performed complex maintenance with speed and an air of confidence. Tools were plentiful and immediately available. Spare parts were delivered without the typical bureaucratic requisition delays. Critically, every vehicle utilized the same basic components, enabling any mechanic to service any piece of equipment without needing specialized training. An American sergeant who possessed serviceable German noticed one of the captured mechanics observing the scene intently. "Are you a mechanic?" "I was in the Afrika Korps vehicle maintenance section," the German replied. The sergeant grinned broadly. "Well, your war is done, but I'd wager you have questions. Come on, I'll show you around. It's not like you can steal anything now." What followed was a highly educational afternoon. The sergeant led him through the motor pool, candidly explaining the American maintenance philosophy. The fundamental principle is that we design everything so any farm boy can fix it. Most of our guys have never seen a vehicle engine before basic training, so we prioritize simplicity. Color-coded wiring, standardized fasteners, clearly labeled components. Our service manuals are literally written for a 6th grade reading level. The concept is that if something fails, anyone can repair it without waiting for a specialist. The captured mechanic closely examined a disassembled Jeep engine. Every component was clearly stamped. The maintenance manual included detailed illustrations and straightforward, step-by-step instructions that could be followed by someone with minimal prior mechanical knowledge. What is your production volume for these? The sergeant simply shrugged. Hell, I don't know the precise figures, but I'd guess thousands every week. They roll off the assembly lines faster than we can ship them out. We have so many Jeeps that if one breaks down on duty, we often just grab a replacement immediately instead of spending time on an urgent repair. Thousands every week. The number felt statistically impossible, yet the undeniable evidence was everywhere he looked. The motor pool held more vehicles than entire German divisions had ever possessed, and this was only a small American unit at a secondary supply base. The sergeant continued the tour. Dodge trucks capable of hauling loads that would require 2 German vehicles, half-track personnel carriers manufactured in such vast quantities that their German counterparts seemed like museum rarities, tank transporters capable of moving heavy armor without damaging the tracks. The key lesson we took from the last war, the sergeant explained, is building everything with component commonality. A bolt from a Jeep fits a truck, and that same bolt fits a half-track. The same standardization applies to electrical parts, hydraulic systems, everything. It completely simplifies logistics. Instead of needing 1,000 unique spare parts, we need maybe a couple hundred, and we produce those couple hundred by the millions. This was the secret that German manufacturing had failed to fully grasp. Component commonality was not merely a point of production efficiency. It created a self-reinforcing logistical ecosystem where any part could be used anywhere, any mechanic could service any vehicle, and the entire system constantly replenished itself. The journey from North Africa to the American prison camps continued this unique education. At every stopover, the German prisoners witnessed American industrial capacity operating on a scale that shattered their every preconception. The port facilities at Norfolk, Virginia, processed thousands of tons of supplies daily with mechanical precision. Cranes loaded and unloaded cargo at speeds that would have required literal armies of workers in Hamburg. Trains carried the prisoners across the American continent in passenger coaches that would have been considered absolute luxury in wartime Germany. And vehicles were everywhere. Cars filled the vast parking lots outside factories, trucks lined highways in convoys stretching for miles, military vehicles sat by the thousands in massive depot yards, awaiting shipment to combat zones. At Camp Hearn, Texas, German mechanics with skilled trades volunteered to work in the camp motor pool. American camp commanders eagerly accepted their expertise, as the war effort demanded every available worker. For the next 2 years, German mechanics worked directly alongside American soldiers, maintaining the very vehicles that kept the camp operational. American mechanics approached vehicle maintenance with blunt pragmatism. They were not engineers obsessively pursuing perfection, they were functional problem solvers focused only on keeping equipment running. When something broke, they fixed it rapidly, using whatever means necessary. If a part was unavailable, they improvised a solution. If a vehicle was damaged beyond economical repair, they stripped it for usable components and immediately requested a replacement, which would typically arrive in days rather than weeks. The captured mechanics closely observed the American methods. German mechanics were rigorously trained to restore vehicles to precise factory specifications, demanding specialized tools and formalized procedures. American mechanics were trained to keep things operational by any necessary means. In peacetime, German methods yielded demonstrably superior results. But amidst the chaos of total war, the American approach proved immeasurably more effective. The Camp Hearn motor pool processed hundreds of vehicles monthly. Jeeps arrived for routine service, were returned to duty in hours rather than days, and exhibited exceptional reliability. This efficiency was directly attributable to the abundance of spare parts and the complete interchangeability of components. When a part needed replacement, the parts room had dozens in stock. When a specialized tool was required, the tool room provided it instantly. When a vehicle was beyond repair, a brand new replacement immediately took its place. One German mechanic befriended an American soldier who had worked for the Ford Motor Company before joining the service. The American was highly knowledgeable about the automotive sector. Before the war, I was on the assembly line at Willow Run, the American shared. That's Ford's massive bomber plant outside Detroit, the biggest factory in the world. We were building B-24 Liberators. Production started in '42, and by the time I was drafted last year, we were completing one bomber every single hour. A fully operational 4-engine heavy bomber rolled off that line every 60 minutes. The arithmetic was staggering, 24 bombers daily, over 700 monthly. How is such volume even remotely possible, the German asked. Mass production principles, the American explained. Mr. Ford pioneered the method of deconstructing intricate fabrication processes into elementary, iterative stages. Skilled artisans are unnecessary when each worker is responsible for one highly specific, repetitive task. A raw kid fresh off the farm can be trained in a single week to install one type of bolt in one specific location. Do that with 1,000 workers, and the result is massive output. This highlighted the fundamental divergence. German production relied heavily on skilled craftsmen building products of exquisite quality in moderate volumes. American production relied on a semi-skilled labor force building vehicles of adequate quality in truly massive volumes. The American continued, the same principle applies to the Jeeps. Willis Overland makes them, and so does Ford. Both plants use completely identical specifications. A spare part from a Willis Jeep fits a Ford Jeep perfectly, they are fully interchangeable. This means if one plant is targeted by bombers or experiences internal issues, the other keeps producing. Maintenance is simple because every mechanic learns one core vehicle design, not dozens of unique variants. The German mechanic reflected on the Wehrmacht's vehicle inventory, dozens of incompatible truck types from various manufacturers, each requiring unique parts and specialized maintenance knowledge, Kübelwagens from Volkswagen, command cars from numerous other sources, plus a wide variety of captured vehicles from across Europe, each demanding its own unique spares and knowledge base. German logistics was a true nightmare of incompatible systems. American logistics, by design, was streamlined through uniformity. The real genius, the American finished, is that the design prioritized manufacturability from the very start. When the specifications for the Jeep were first issued back in 1940, companies were given only 75 days to deliver a prototype. American Bantam delivered theirs in 49 days. Willis and Ford then perfected the design for massive-scale production. The vehicle had to be simple to manufacture, simple to service, and simple to repair. The captured mechanics had examined enough Jeeps to acknowledge this essential truth. The vehicle was not aesthetically elegant. German engineers would undoubtedly have produced a more sophisticated design, but sophistication inherently impeded mass production, and mass production was demonstrably winning the war. By the summer of 1944, prisoners were hearing rumors of Operation Overlord, the impending Allied invasion of Normandy. When news confirmed the landing's success, many felt no surprise. The Allied nations possessed the industrial capacity to construct an entire invasion fleet, a task that would have taken Germany years to assemble. News filtered into the camps via American newspapers and radio broadcasts. They read accounts of the Normandy beaches, where Allied forces landed thousands of vehicles in the first wave alone, jeeps, trucks, tanks, and amphibious vehicles, all carried across the English Channel in purpose-built landing craft that were themselves mass-manufactured by the thousands. The scale of the operation defied comprehension: 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the initial assault. Within a few weeks, millions of Allied soldiers would be engaged in combat across Europe, all supplied by a production base that fabricated equipment faster than the Wehrmacht could possibly destroy it. German prisoners contemplated their pre-war certainty of victory. That confidence had rested upon the assumption of superior German technology. Those assumptions proved fundamentally flawed. Germany did hold superior engineering in several domains. German tanks were often more heavily protected and better armed than their American counterparts. German aircraft were frequently more technically sophisticated. German small arms were of excellent quality. Yet, none of that mattered when the United States could manufacture 5 tanks for every one Germany produced, 10 trucks for every German truck, and 100 jeeps for every single Kübelwagen. One afternoon in the motor pool, prisoners watched American soldiers loading jeeps onto flatbed transport trucks for shipment to the port. A young private drove each jeep up the loading ramps with an air of casual familiarity. Dozens of vehicles were loaded in less than an hour, all destined for Europe to replace combat losses and supply new units. One German mechanic suddenly realized that this single, isolated loading operation at one camp in Texas involved more vehicles than his entire division had ever possessed in North Africa. This scene was being replicated at supply depots and camps across the entire United States, every single day. The mathematics became inescapable. Germany had fully mobilized its economy for total war, aggressively stripping civilian production to support the military. Yet, Germany's total military vehicle production in 1943 amounted to less than 100,000 units of all types. America, all the while maintaining a largely thriving civilian economy, manufactured over 2 million military vehicles that same year. The disparity was not just a quantitative failure, it was a qualitative one. American vehicles were designed explicitly for wartime conditions, ease of maintenance, interchangeable parts, simple operation, and rugged reliability. German vehicles were engineered to detailed specifications that made sense in a peacetime context but proved profoundly impractical in prolonged, sustained combat. In November 1944, news reached the camp of a massive German counteroffensive in the Ardennes, what would become infamously known as the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's final, desperate gamble in the West. The offensive was critically reliant on the Wehrmacht capturing American fuel depots, as Germany no longer possessed adequate fuel to sustain its armored divisions. Even more disturbing were reports concerning Operation Greif, Otto Skorzeny's commando operation, which utilized captured American equipment. German soldiers, dressed in American uniforms and carrying fake ID, were equipped with captured jeeps to infiltrate Allied lines, cause mass confusion, and secure vital bridges. If even Skorzeny, Hitler's celebrated commando who had rescued Mussolini, was reduced to relying on captured American vehicles because the German alternatives were insufficient, it spoke volumes about the Wehrmacht's dire material situation. The operation ultimately failed. American military police quickly identified the German infiltrators through detailed questioning about American culture and procedures. The Ardennes offensive itself ground to a halt, not primarily due to the fierce American resistance, but because the German forces literally ran out of fuel. Panzer divisions abandoned their tanks when fuel trucks failed to materialize. Infantry divisions were forced to resort to horse-drawn transport as motorized logistics completely collapsed. By January 1945, the German assault had been contained and decisively reversed. The spring of 1945 brought the inevitable news of Germany's collapse. The Red Army was closing on Berlin from the east. American and British forces had crossed the Rhine and were driving deep into the German heartland from the west. In the camp motor pool, the German mechanics stoically continued their work, maintaining the vehicles for the very army that had ultimately defeated their homeland. They felt no professional satisfaction in their task, but equally no personal shame. Germany had been defeated, not for a lack of courage or fighting skill among its soldiers, but because it had challenged industrialized powers whose production capacity it could never hope to match. One afternoon in April, an American soldier approached with the news. Germany has surrendered. The war is over in Europe. The mechanics simply nodded. They had expected this outcome for months. What happens to us now? You will eventually go home, the soldier replied. Probably not immediately, there are immense logistics to sort out, but you will go home. One mechanic considered this prospect, home to a Germany flattened by bombing, occupied by foreign armies, its cities reduced to rubble by the same colossal manufacturing might that had created the Jeep he had first examined years earlier. The American asked, "You seem intelligent. Did you genuinely believe Germany could win this war?" The mechanic deliberated carefully before answering. Before the war, yes. We were certain that German quality would inevitably prevail over American quantity. We had observed American consumer products before the war, and many were inferior to German equivalents. We foolishly assumed the American military equipment would be the same. But it was not. When we inspected that first Jeep in '42, we immediately recognized our fundamental error. We had dangerously conflated peacetime luxury quality with wartime functional effectiveness. Your Jeep was not fundamentally better engineered than our Kubelwagen in pure technical terms. It was, however, better designed for mass production and for extreme field conditions. In a total global war, that difference proved utterly decisive. The American nodded. Yes. We build adequate products quickly, and in enormous quantities. Precisely, the mechanic confirmed. They stood in shared silence for a moment, two mechanics from opposing sides, now united by a deep professional understanding of what had truly determined the outcome of the war. The repatriation process commenced in late 1945. German prisoners boarded ships for the long journey home. One particular mechanic arrived in Bremen in January 1946, processing through Allied control stations before his release. The city was a ruin, mountains of rubble stretched in every direction. But amidst the overwhelming destruction, he noticed something significant. American vehicles were everywhere. Jeeps carried Allied officers through the shattered streets. Trucks delivered vital relief supplies. Motor pools were operational, where German civilians already worked alongside Allied soldiers. He approached one motor pool, introducing himself to the American captain in command. His English, acquired during his years of captivity, was perfectly serviceable. "Sir, I am a former Oberfeldwebel of the Afrika Korps, recently repatriated from Camp Hearn, Texas. I am a highly trained vehicle mechanic with 2 years of experience maintaining American equipment. Are you currently hiring civilian workers?" The captain studied his identification papers. "It says here you worked in our motor pool in Texas. Is that accurate?" "Yes, sir. 2 full years." The captain made a note. "We desperately need mechanics. Most German mechanics are either dead or still in POW camps. You can begin tomorrow. Pay is an occupation script, redeemable for rations and necessities." And so, the former Afrika Korps mechanic found himself employed by the very army he had fought against, maintaining the same vehicles he had once inspected as enemy material. The Allies required mechanics, he needed employment. The war had concluded, and life had to continue. Over the following months, he witnessed the initial stages of Germany's reconstruction. American aid poured into the country, distributed with the same logistical efficiency that had won the war. Food, medicine, and construction materials arrived consistently in American trucks, coordinated by American planners who approached the rebuilding of Germany systematically. He worked within the motor pool, training younger German men in American maintenance methods. Many of his students were former Wehrmacht soldiers like himself, men who desperately required civilian skills in a Germany that would no longer possess a military. He imparted the lessons he had observed: simplicity over complex sophistication, functionality over theoretical perfection, and measurable results over abstract theory. These were lessons learned directly from American vehicles, entirely applicable to rebuilding German manufacturing. By 1947, he had been promoted to supervisor of the motor pool's German civilian staff. The American captain commanding the facility treated him with respect, highly valuing his extensive experience and organizational abilities. One evening, the captain invited him to share a drink in his office. "I've been contemplating something," the captain began. "You have extensive experience with both German and American vehicles. If you were commissioned to design a vehicle for the new Germany, what would it look like?" The mechanic considered the question deeply. "I would adapt the American design approach for European conditions. It would be smaller than a Jeep, more fuel efficient, but it would adhere to the same underlying philosophy. Common interchangeable parts, simple field maintenance, and designed first and foremost for ease of manufacturing, rather than purely for engineering accolades. Europe has smaller roads and restricted fuel resources, but we must have the reliability inherent in American design thinking." The captain nodded slowly. "That is shrewd. Marshall Plan funds will rebuild German manufacturing, and German engineers are already studying American methods intensely. The future will involve American-style mass production, carefully adapted for local European conditions. This prediction proved completely prophetic. In the decades that followed, West German manufacturing wholeheartedly adopted the American production ethos while successfully preserving traditional German attention to detail and quality. This fusion resulted in an economic renaissance that rapidly transformed Germany from a devastated nation into an industrial powerhouse. Companies like Volkswagen, which had produced the Kübelwagen during the war, evolved into global automotive giants by skillfully combining German engineering precision with American mass production techniques. The Volkswagen Beetle, which became one of the best-selling automobiles in history, embodied this perfect synthesis. It was fundamentally simple, uniquely reliable, manufacturable in colossal quantities, and affordably priced for the average family. Former Wehrmacht mechanics who had worked in American prison camp motor pools returned to Germany possessing invaluable knowledge. They understood the necessity of component standardization. They had witnessed systems for efficient parts distribution firsthand. They had observed how simplified maintenance procedures exponentially increased vehicle availability. Crucially, they had learned that designing for ease of manufacturability, rather than technical perfection, was the key enabler of mass production. These hard-won insights, gained over years of maintaining American equipment, profoundly influenced German automotive design for decades. The German manufacturers that rose from the ruins consciously avoided simply recreating their pre-war approaches. Instead, they synthesized German precision with American production efficiency. By the early 1950s, this hybrid approach was yielding dramatic results. Volkswagen production rapidly scaled up from thousands of units annually to hundreds of thousands. Mercedes-Benz adopted modern assembly line techniques while diligently maintaining their strict quality standards. BMW completely restructured its manufacturing process to emphasize component commonality across all model lines. The economic miracle of the 1950s and 1960s owed a significant debt to these fundamental changes. West Germany became a global export powerhouse, selling vehicles worldwide that expertly combined reliability with affordability. The final synthesis of German and American philosophies created products that neither nation's pre-war approach could have generated alone. The U.S. Army historian Hugh M. Cole, who conducted extensive interviews with Wehrmacht generals following their surrender, documented their collective perspective. Cole reported that, among all the formidable American arsenal, German military leaders admired the simple Jeep above all else, more so than the B-17 bombers, the Sherman tanks, or the colossal artillery. The simple Jeep, they said, because it perfectly embodied the manufacturing philosophy that had ultimately decided the war. General George C. Marshall himself famously referred to the Jeep as America's greatest single contribution to modern warfare. This was not mere hyperbole. The Jeep represented principles that revolutionized not only military logistics but also the entire field of post-war global manufacturing, standardization, simplification, design optimized for production, and an absolute emphasis on reliability over technical sophistication. By November 1943, the U.S. Army had collected sufficient data on captured Kübelwagens to publish Technical Manual TME 9-803, a comprehensive guide to operating and maintaining the German vehicle. The manual was printed and distributed on June 6, 1944, D-Day, enabling American forces landing in France to immediately utilize any Kübelwagen they captured. The Wehrmacht, astonishingly, never published an equivalent service manual for the Jeep, despite capturing thousands. They did not need to, the Jeep was so intuitively designed that any mechanic could quickly master its operation. This contrast perfectly illustrated the profound difference in design philosophy. The sophisticated Kübelwagen required a detailed manual, translated into English, for American mechanics to comprehend its systems. The Jeep required no manual whatsoever for German mechanics to effectively operate and maintain it. The Afrika Korps veterans began holding reunions in the 1960s. Former members captured in Tunisia gathered to honor fallen comrades. At one gathering in 1967, an impromptu discussion naturally turned to the vehicles of the war. One former mechanic offered his considered perspective: the Kübelwagen was certainly better engineered in many respects, lighter, more fuel-efficient, and superior for desert conditions due to its air-cooled engine. But the Jeep was indisputably better designed for the reality of modern war. Four-wheel drive, simpler servicing, common parts, and most importantly, it was producible in quantities we could never hope to match. An elderly officer who had commanded a reconnaissance unit nodded. I vividly recall capturing my first Jeep in '41. We viewed it as crude compared to our own vehicles. It took us months to comprehend that its simplicity was, in fact, elegant efficiency. By '43, every unit desperately wanted captured Jeeps because they performed so much better under actual combat conditions. Another veteran added, the most terrible moment for me was realizing that America was producing more Jeeps in a single week than Germany was producing Kübelwagens in a whole year. That was the instant I knew we were defeated, not by a specific battle, but by simple, devastating mathematics. They could replace their losses faster than we could possibly inflict them. This consensus emerged consistently from such gatherings. German soldiers held immense respect for the Kübelwagen as a machine. Yet, they universally recognized that the Jeep, and the massive industrial capacity it represented, had been the decisive factor. It was not merely its combat effectiveness, though it was effective, but what it revealed about the staggering disparity in manufacturing capability between the combatants. The Wehrmacht's logistical situation had been dire throughout the entire war. By 1943, an estimated 80% of all German divisions relied heavily on horse-drawn transport. The German army began World War II with 514,000 horses and would ultimately utilize 2.75 million horses and mules during the conflict, with approximately 1.1 million animals in service at any given time. Over 2 million of these animals perished during the fighting. In stark contrast, American divisions were completely motorized. Every American unit relied exclusively on trucks, not horses, for logistics. This generated operational advantages that Wehrmacht commanders could only envy. American supply convoys could cover hundreds of kilometers in a single day. German supply columns, limited by the walking pace of horses, averaged only about 30 kilometers daily, even under optimal conditions. When Wehrmacht generals conducted post-mortem examinations of their defeat, they consistently cited the overwhelming material disparity as the primary cause, rather than tactical or strategic failures. German soldiers fought with immense skill and courage. German officers consistently made reasonable tactical decisions. But German industry simply could not manufacture sufficient equipment to sustain operations against enemies possessing such overwhelming material superiority. The Jeep became the ultimate symbol of this disparity because every German soldier who encountered one instinctively understood what it represented. Here was a vehicle so utterly abundant that Americans treated it as disposable, so reliable that it required minimal maintenance, so simple that any soldier could operate and repair it, and so effective that German units preferentially employed captured Jeeps over their own vehicles whenever the opportunity arose. In 1976, the United States Army began the process of replacing the Jeep with the HMMWV, Humvee. The Jeep had served for an extraordinary 35 years, an incredible lifespan for any military vehicle. Many remained in active service with reserve units and allied militaries for decades more. That same year, Volkswagen celebrated the 1 millionth VW Golf produced. The Golf, like the Beetle before it, successfully embodied the critical lessons learned from both the German and American approaches, meticulous engineering combined with massive-scale production efficiency. This synthesis was the engine that had rebuilt Germany. By the 1980s, West Germany had ascended to become one of the world's leading economies. German automotive companies exported millions of vehicles annually. German manufacturing was globally synonymous with quality and reliability, but that quality was now seamlessly paired with efficient production methods that owed a huge debt to American influence. The final Africa Corps reunion took place in 1998. Fewer than 24 veterans attended, all in their late 70s or 80s, the survivors of a conflict that had ended more than half a century earlier. During the reunion, someone mentioned that a local museum had recently acquired a perfectly restored Willys MB Jeep. Most of the veterans immediately wanted to visit. They stood in a small group around the vehicle, These elderly men who had once been young soldiers in the North African desert, examining it with the critical eyes of mechanics and warriors who had long ago come to respect it. One veteran reached out to touch the hood, his arthritic fingers tracing the familiar contours. "I captured one of these in '42, he quietly recalled. "Used it for 3 months before I was wounded at El Alamein. Best vehicle I ever drove. Superior to anything we possessed." Another veteran nodded. "I inspected one in Tunisia just before our surrender. I couldn't believe how fundamentally simple the design was. It was then I understood that our entire approach to vehicle design had been flawed. Too complicated. Too difficult to produce and maintain." A third veteran added the final, crushing comparison: "They manufactured over 600,000 of them. We manufactured 50,000 cubic." That ratio told the entire story. They stood in silence for a moment. The Jeep sat before them, a museum artifact now, its war long since concluded. But for these veterans, it represented something far greater than mere history. It was a tangible symbol of the production capacity that had ultimately defeated them, the functional engineering that proved most effective, and the abundance that had overwhelmed their nation's scarcity. "We never had vehicles like this," one finally admitted. "Not in these numbers, not with this reliability, and not designed with this particular philosophy. Our focus was perfection. Their objective was production." This was the profound lesson that Wehrmacht mechanics had internalized while examining captured Jeeps in the searing deserts of North Africa, the Rocky Mountains of Italy, and the muddy fields of France. It was a lesson that shaped the reconstruction of post-war Germany and subsequently influenced global industrial development. The Jeep proved to be far more than just a vehicle, it was an education. Wehrmacht mechanics, thoroughly humbled by defeat, proved to be exceptional students. They studied not just how to service American equipment, but why that equipment had been engineered in that specific way, and what those core design choices revealed about the manufacturing philosophy that secured the Allied victory. That knowledge, painful in its acquisition, became the critical foundation for Germany's eventual reconstruction and enduring prosperity. Defeat instilled humility. American equipment taught functional engineering. The combination forged a new German industrial philosophy that served the nation far better than the pre-war hubris. The narrative of the Wehrmacht mechanics and the Jeep is an enduring story of learning forged through failure. Pride had convinced them that German engineering was inherently superior, that quality would naturally triumph over mere quantity, and that sophistication would inevitably overcome simplicity. Reality taught them otherwise. American vehicles were not technically better engineered than German equivalents in most specifications, but they were flawlessly designed for the realities of modern total warfare. They were manufacturable in overwhelming quantities, maintainable by minimally trained personnel, constructed with completely common and interchangeable parts, and reliably rugged under conditions of extreme abuse. This inherent functionality, when multiplied by American manufacturing capacity, generated an overwhelming material superiority that no amount of German tactical skill or personal courage could possibly overcome. The Wehrmacht possessed excellent soldiers, capable officers, and sophisticated equipment. But it lacked the fundamental industrial base required to sustain a total war against enemies who could fabricate equipment faster than Germany could effectively destroy it. The mechanics who personally maintained both German and American vehicles understood this truth through direct, painful experience. They had witnessed both systems in operation. They had worked with vehicles designed from fundamentally different philosophies. They knew exactly which approach proved more effective under the pressure of combat. That crucial knowledge subsequently informed their work in rebuilding Germany. When they trained new, young mechanics, they emphasized the lessons learned the hard way. When they consulted on industrial processes, they passionately advocated for standardization and simplification. When they designed new products, they prioritized manufacturability and absolute reliability. The engineers who revitalized the German automotive and machinery sectors had meticulously studied captured American equipment, worked within prison camp motor pools, and observed American manufacturing methods in detail. They created an entirely new hybrid, German precision expertly combined with American production efficiency. That hybrid proved to be extraordinarily successful. By the 1970s, West Germany was one of the world's leading exporters of manufactured goods. Its economic success was a direct validation of the lessons of defeat. Germany had willingly abandoned the industrial hubris that contributed to catastrophe and adopted a far more effective industrial approach, informed by the intensive study of the victor's methods. The Jeep played a singularly meaningful role in that national transformation through direct experience. Every Wehrmacht mechanic who serviced a captured Jeep absorbed deep insights into the American philosophy. Every officer who drove in a captured Jeep recognized its functional advantages. Every soldier who witnessed the sheer abundance of Allied vehicles finally understood what propaganda had desperately tried to conceal. These shared experiences, distributed among hundreds of thousands of German soldiers and prisoners, created a widespread, lasting understanding that Germany's defeat was not primarily a military one, but a material one. This understanding profoundly shaped attitudes toward post-war reconstruction. German leaders and engineers actively sought to adapt American methods rather than simply restore the pre-war practices that had proven so inadequate. They enthusiastically embraced mass manufacturing instead of emphasizing small-scale, artisanal craft production. They designed for optimal manufacturability and reliability, discarding the pursuit of engineering perfection regardless of production difficulty. The Wehrmacht mechanics who first encountered the Jeep in the North African deserts could not have possibly foreseen the long-term influence of that initial encounter. They were only trying to comprehend an enemy vehicle, assess its immediate capabilities, and determine whether their own forces could use it. In doing so, they uncovered fundamental truths about manufacturing capacity and engineering philosophy that would guide the remainder of their lives and shape their entire nation's reconstruction. The last of those mechanics have now passed away. Their direct, personal testimony is lost to history, but the essential lessons they learned remain permanently embedded in industrial practices worldwide. Every vehicle designed today for ease of manufacture owes something to the philosophy the Jeep perfectly embodied. Every standardized part reflects the American influence on global standards. Every modern emphasis on robust reliability echoes the painful lessons learned in those motor pools where Wehrmacht mechanics serviced captured American equipment. This is the Jeep's ultimate legacy, a teacher of principles that fundamentally transformed global manufacturing. It taught that assumptions of superiority demand scrutiny, that functional effectiveness is more vital than technical sophistication, and that designing for ease of manufacture and maintenance provides a superior service than designing for theoretical perfection. Those lessons helped transition Germany from a defeated enemy to a prosperous, stable ally. The mechanics who first admitted they had never had vehicles like the Jeep became the quiet architects of national renewal. Their hard-won humility, born from defeat and educated by observation, served Germany far better than the pride that preceded the catastrophe. In November 1942, examining a captured Jeep in the North African desert, Wehrmacht mechanics unknowingly began a journey of discovery that would influence an entire generation. The mechanics who drove those captured Jeeps admitted they had never had vehicles like it. That stark admission marked the true beginning of the wisdom that ultimately rebuilt a nation.